Question 1b was a theory question, specifically looking at our qualitative characteristics and accounting principles. So what we were asked was, given that in 1a we processed the following transaction, we recorded a bad debt, we were then asked, with reference to one accounting principle, explain why the entry on the 27th of February needs to be made. So for 1 mark, we had to identify an accounting principle, so in this case conservatism. Now, depending on how you're taught, we always define that principle and then relate it to the case study. So in this case, we're going to use caution, and we're going to do so by recognizing losses when they're expected to occur. However, we haven't now related that to a bad debt. We haven't mentioned anything to do with bad debts. So what we'll do for our last mark is then go and say, what does being cautious and recognizing an expected loss have to do with this question? And it's all about the bad debt. That is an expected loss of future cash, and we're going to recognize that so our assets are not overstated, and the asset in question is debtors control, and our expenses, in this case bad debts, are not understated. Another alternative answer was you could have used the reporting period principle. So we answer that the same way. We identify it for 1 mark, we define it, so in this case a bad debt is an expense incurred in the current reporting period. And then what has that got to do with a bad debt? Well, we need to match that against our revenue, and that'll help us calculate an accurate net profit. Looking at the marks, it was the average is 1.7 out of 3. 20% of students got 0, which is quite disappointing considering you got 1 mark for just identifying the correct accounting principle. 20% got 1, 29% got 2, and a healthy 30% got 3 out of 3. Looking at the examiner's comments, some important info to look at here. Don't get your accounting principles and qualitative characteristics mixed up. So probably the most common qualitative characteristic that people may have used would have been relevance, which it is applicable here, but the question did ask for an accounting principle. And most importantly, rote-learned definitions. For example, if you use conservatism and you said this means we must not overstate liabilities, or understate liabilities or overstate revenues, you shouldn't mention that, and in fact you'll lose a mark if you do. That has no applicability to this question. It's about bad debts, and a bad debt affects assets and expenses. It's got nothing to do with liabilities and revenues, so you only give the part of the definition that is appropriate or relevant to that particular question.